Live. Okay, we're live. Go ahead.
Live. Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Millennial Think Tank episode 2, July 17th. I'm going to be your host this week. You can see Amy, but I'll be the one talking. So I'm Hessie Jones from our company. What I'm going to do is, first of all, we have some new millennials that are going to be with us today, but what I want to do is have everyone introduce themselves. Tell us your age. You don't have to tell us the exact age. Tell us whether or not you're a younger millennial or older one, and what you're doing right now. Okay, let's start off with Joe.
Sure. So I'm Joe Cardillo, and I'm 30, so I'm just on the slight upper range of the millennial world. And I do a lot of work around content growth, analytics, content hacking, startups, building stuff from scratch, stuff like that, and kind of into content journalism, anything around science, anything geeky.
Cool. Judy.
I'm Judy McCleskey. I'm 31, so I'm also an older millennial. I have a background in the arts, and I do a lot of social media and digital media work for theater companies, larger arts companies like that, and I also do a lot of comedy writing, which is heavy into satire and has been dealing with, I'm sure, issues we're going to talk about tonight.
That's great. Thank you. Kiernan, the guy with the two today.
Oh, well, hi, I'm Kiernan. I guess I'm on the younger end of the spectrum. I'm 21, and I'm an English literature student. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. And Samantha.
My name's Samantha. I'm 23, so I'm part of the younger section. I've done a lot of work within community social management, and I'm currently doing more work around public policy for nonprofit organizations, and I work in PIRGs, so public interest research groups, and so it's a pretty awesome space to teach younger individuals and community members how to become agents of social change. So
great. And one thing I want to add is that Samantha just got married.
Yes, I did just get married.
Wow, you are an optimist.
Yes.
And I'm Amy Tobin. I'm VP of Content and Strategy at our company, and I'm not well, so I'm going to try not to talk a lot tonight and let Hessie run it, but this will be an experiment for both of us.
Exactly. So I want to give everybody kind of a reminder of why we started this. There's been a lot of articles written about Generation Y and millennials for some time now, and it's really important because what people are starting to realize is that, like, in the next 10 years, 2025, 75% of the workforce will actually be, as one would put it, taken over by Gen Y, right? And so what everybody's worried about is that there's this tried and true leadership techniques that have been applied in the last, 20, 30 years, and they're going to become obsolete because of what they think this new generation is going to do in terms of emerging as a new world leader. So with that, there's been a lot of sweeping generalizations, and it's actually created almost like a generalizational divide between boomers, even Gen Xers and Gen Ys. And you know, this whole thing about Gen Ys being entitled generation, lazier, you know, we needed to be able to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what, instead of actually researching about this generation, let's just ask them their opinions on things, right? Let's get them to dispel a lot of the myths that are out there about Generation Y. And so we decided to recruit some pretty smart young millennials, and who are vocal, who really understand, like, from a global standpoint, what the perceptions are about them, and how they are actually impacting, or what their opinions are about those generalizations. And Kiernan said this best when Amy put up a post on Facebook, is that we really have to build empathy for this group, right? We want to understand their true perceptions about things. What are their challenges? Why they think the way they do? And that's why we brought this group together. And so this is our second episode. Tonight we're going to cover this idea of brand ethics. And as you all know, what's been on the rise from a trending perspective in the last couple of years has been this notion of social responsibility. whether or not companies are doing it to gain sentiment, or whether or not it's been implicit within the growth of the company, social responsibility has been huge. There's one guy who actually talked about this idea of brand ethics, and he basically said that he foresees a kind of WikiLeaks emerging to tackle what does he call the less ethical brands. He said there's going to be a move to that's going to come from independent organizations with their sole mission of disclosing those companies that are doing things that are either bad for the environment or bad for the consumer. And the most vulnerable consumers will be targeted, but the ones the rising, what was he saying? The rise of the consumer voice is going to get these guys to actually back into the corner and make themselves a lot more transparent. So I want to discuss that and get you guys to tell me about your idea of brand ethics and whether or not and why it's so strong right now, and what are your views on it? Is it your generation that helped build ethical standards for brand ethics? Anybody want to start?
You have to make them. And
Okay.
that was a long introduction.
Well, I know.
I talk a lot.
Sorry, Amy. Well, I don't want to. I'm not like a teacher or anything. Okay, Samantha, I'm gonna get you to start.
I think, at least from the perspective that I'm thinking of here, there are two ways that I'm seeing this. One, I would love to have corporations be accountable for their actions, and often whenever I have the ability to spend more money at an ethical place, I will. Sometimes, though, it's very difficult to be able to be financially available to make that ethical choice. And so we're really going to see a class divide on this. So corporations like Walmart, Target, the big companies in the States, while they are going to be targeted first, they're also going to be the ones that often are shopped at by those lower income and lower socioeconomic status individuals. So it's very much of this like conscious pull. I find, at least my own personal ability, that I'll try and spend that extra dollar at a business that's owned by like a smaller company or a group of individuals or a co-op. But I understand at the same time that I shouldn't be removing outlets for people that cannot afford any other outlets, and I'd rather be working towards unionization for employees or looking at ways that we can still make things available for those who don't have the ability, like myself currently, to spend more ethically.
Okay. Judy, do you agree with that? I'm just wondering if this is a generational thing, or this has something more to do with economic status.
I definitely agree with a lot of what Samantha said. As I said, I have a background in arts, so I was in a little bit of a lower economic status for quite a while than I am now, and even at that point, you sit there and start making choices based on what do I need and what, as a person do I find more important. So, I used to work for a dog company, and we would be really careful about, buying biodegradable dog bags to pick up poop with. And we also were aware that we were recommending these to other people, and not every time can you afford to buy, these specialty corn-based bags that come only from California. And we kind of came from a place of do what you can when you have the extra dollar. And I kind of approached things in that way as I was going through my 20s. So even when I was in college, it's the same idea. It's constantly there. Where is my money going as a vote, as a reminder of what I want my country to be, what I want these companies to be, idealizing. And I think as you, kind of at either end of that, you can have a choice in it, but it changes obviously, if you have others depending on you, if you have families, if you're in, a rougher situation than starving college student, obviously. But I definitely agree that there's a lot of value in what Samantha said, to the point that taking these outlets away, taking the Walmarts, the Targets, they're not removing them from the scene is not going to be beneficial to the people who need them economically at this point. And I think that social change through pressure and awareness to the other portions of their clientele is really what's going to have the first sort of level of impact.
No, that's great. I'm wondering from Kieran and your standpoint on this, and whether or not you think the same way, because the funny thing is that can anybody with a collective voice really tear down a Walmart these days? Potentially.
Or even, honestly, even a cool brand like American Apparel, or I don't know, if you're in love with Chick-fil-A, do you stop going there when the CEO speaks out against homosexual marriage? I don't think about it as necessarily the product costs more because the brand's ethical. It may be it may be that it doesn't, but so to me it's just more about how cognizant are you of brand ethics when you make a purchase.
Well, I mean, personally, I care about brand ethics. I try to do a lot of research before I'm going to make a big purchase. But I think there's a difference between real brand ethics and superficial brand ethics. And I shared this link over here in the chat, and it's an internet meme. It's college liberal, and it's actually pretty funny. And the thing is, when I think brand ethics, I think of the Apple Corporation. All right, I mean, millennials love Apple products. People are obsessed with it. It's like a cult following. But you want to look at the ethics of the Apple Corporation, it's abysmal. They have underpaid, people in China, work at slave wages, and they're one of the biggest consumers of these precious metals at tantalum, where most of it is mined in Central Africa, in the Congo, and there's no such thing as ethics with the Apple Corporation. They're this big, evil conglomerate. They're no different than ExxonMobil, but somehow.
And what do you have as a phone?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I've got an Android. I boycott the Apple Corporation personally, but I mean, it's the same. It's the same with all the other companies too. I mean, they're just not as successful marketing as the Apple Corporation is. I'm sure
not necessarily. Samsung just stopped production immediately in a Chinese factory when it found out that there were legitimate child labor complaints. Like, stopped it on the dime the other day.
Well, and most of the products, for Samsung, they're made in Korea, they're made in Japan. They're actual, they're made in developed countries, where people are getting paid a fair wage, and even their assembly plants in China, they are better regulated from a humanitarian standpoint. But I mean, I personally, consider these things when I go and I make a purchase. But I think that this whole sort of superficial, brand ethics is something that is pretty peculiar. I don't know if it's just the millennial generation, but all sorts of generations. But the same type of people who are going and buying their craft, organic bread from the farmers market bakery, or they're wearing their little Tom shoes, or doing who knows what. They're also supporting these other non-ethical practices. And
so
as a consumer.
Do your friends talk about this? Do people talk about this? As you know, everyone in our company will tell you I'm anti-Apple cult. I'm not as anti-Apple as you are. I just get so tired of everyone just swallowing it hook, line, and sinker. Hated my iPhone for business. Thought BlackBerry was far superior as a business person. I know it's outdated technology, and moved to Samsung just for that reason. And but honestly, not because I considered so much about the ethics of it, but are people your age still addicted, your college friends, to Apple iPhones, or are people aware of this?
I think it's a class divide, unlike how I see it. I mean, I'm going to bring it back to class because I've worked with mostly lower socioeconomic status people, And so that the hipster type of millennial, these are also individuals who have access to funds that I can't even imagine. Like, goes through a Lexus a year kind of. I'm going to get 4 like iPads, and it doesn't matter how much I spend on them kind of millennial. But then when I think of like my own concepts and my friends and my groups, which often are first gens, second gens, and those who have gone between low to middle, and like even middle is like barely making middle. We do talk a lot more about brand ethics in the sense of like, this corporation does this, or I bought refurbished because then at least I'm not adding to a pile of XYZ. And I mean, even currently I'm going to try and stick with it, but just do secondhand for as long as I can, because that itself is more of an ethical choice than actually supporting a brand itself. And so I think it really depends on who you're talking to, because the college liberal meme, oh my goodness, I can point out those students like that, because
So
it
Kieran,
is really something.
but Kieran, the kids on your campus, like the ones you're going to college with right now, are they when you talk about this, are they like, yeah, here goes Kieran again, or are they on board with it?
Well, I mean, I don't know if my school is the best example. My school is it's pretty bad.
As
um,
in affluent, it's pretty affluent.
yeah, it is. It's all the Ivy League rejects who had too much money to go to a state school.
And you're not.
And,
So,
well, me, I'm the ultra minority.
so are they aware of this? When you talk about this, because I'm sure you do. What do they say? Are they like, yeah, or?
Oh, they don't care. They just think I'm just this crazy guy, rattling on about nonsense. I mean, I tried to start an Amnesty International chapter at Lehigh, and I had like 2 people show up, and I just don't think that really affluent people are really concerned with these social issues. I mean, I'm not trying to speak for everyone. I don't want to make this overarching statement here, but I really feel as though they could care less. Most people in general too. I mean, my mom has an iPhone. My mom, she like, I don't know how she can afford it. She can't afford to pay the electric bill, but she's got an iPhone. I don't get it. I don't understand. She's one of those horrible people they complain about on Fox News. But
I'm
it's
just
not.
wondering, I'm just wondering too, though, Karen, and I'll direct this to Joe as well, because there's this idea that the devices are always on, so you guys are a lot more informed, or technology makes us all more informed about things now. And so probably, let's say 10, 15 years ago, like, we wouldn't have known the veracity of some of the how bad some of these organizations were, from a deep-seated perspective, right? Until what was it? Who was it? Kathy Lee Gifford opened up our minds to what Walmart was doing, right? And suddenly they're brought on.
She got caught. Her factory
Her?
was using child labor. It was her, Kathy
I
Lee.
thought she was
Yeah, she
calling
didn't
out.
open her minds intentionally. She got busted. You're getting
I thought
old,
she was
Hesse.
the one that she opened up the. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So Joe, like, I'm just trying to figure this out as well, because when you buy, do you think first about what you need versus who you're buying from?
Yeah, I mean, so and you said something in the beginning about about sort of a WikiLeaks sort of situation for brands, and I think that's actually fairly fitting, because that question of like, and I wrote something about this a few weeks ago actually when I got laid off. I started thinking about like, what's the difference between what a company says and what a company does, and I mean, that's always been a divide, right? I mean, I think that's, if you're being realistic and you're dealing with companies that are globalized, and they have supply chain economics that mean that their plant in India is doing something that realistically affects us here. We just don't know about it, right? Well, that's starting to change, and that type of divide isn't gonna last. So I think there is a kind of a visibility and insight into brands, and so Having said that, for me personally, in terms of brand ethics, yeah, absolutely. I won't be going to Hobby Lobby ever again. I've been there a number of times, but I won't be going there again. Not because I have a problem with the moral and personal values of the ownership or the senior leadership, but because they're making decisions for their employees that I consider sort of reaching into the freedom of an individual person. And that's the type of approach that I don't like to see in a brand. I don't like to see that built into the DNA of a company where a company feels that they can regulate the personal decisions of the people that work there or the customers, really. And so, the reason I use that as an example is because I think when you talk about brand ethics, I think you're talking about an understanding of a company's approach to doing business with people, to connecting to people, to caring about the world and the environment that they're in. And that, to me, that's massively important. And the same goes for a lot of people. And a lot of brands, once they step over that line, not going to go back.
Mm-hmm. You have to also remember that, like, I don't know how many years ago, like, brand ethics never really existed from a brand perspective, right? Everybody was out to make a buck, right? You talk about the Philip Morrises of the world, those that actually are within the tobacco industry, and up until, what, 10, 15 years ago, they could advertise, right? And they're the ones.
Oh, it was longer than that, wasn't it?
I don't know how many years. Well,
now they're in the vapors.
Was it in the? It was in the 90s. I remember
mid
that
to late 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole idea of being able to put out subliminal advertising to get people to smoke more. I mean, that that in itself made people really cringe. And I think once people started coming out against that kind of stuff, then if you can imagine these guys that have deep pockets, they can't spend that money anywhere, right? And so a lot more people are holding companies a lot more accountable these days. What do you guys think about transparency? And I mean, how difficult is it? I mean, it's something that we ask brands to be, but it's something that's really, really hard because there's always this line about what you can disclose and what you can't. But when it comes to the products that we create, what do you guys think about that in itself? Anyone want to start? Samantha? Transparency.
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, there's a lot of pressure for brands to be almost 100% transparent, which to me is nuts. You can't. As a brand, you're always going to have secrets, right? There are things that haven't come out about, let's say, what am I thinking, potato chips, but trans fats, for example, right? Things that are inherently bad about a product, and maybe that's a bad example, but and are bad for your health, right? But there's things that ingredients even from a pharmaceutical perspective that you can put into drugs that later on is harmful to an individual. So when we talk about transparency, it's not only about from a consumer's perspective, it's disclosure from a product as well. And now there's an expectation that if you're going to put something out there, instead of going through the back door and somebody finding out that you've actually done something awful and then they're going to tell the world, they'd rather you as a brand to be proactive about.
All right, GM is a perfect example. So GM apparently knew that they had the issue with many models of the Cobalt, right? And did nothing for many, many, many years. So who's going to actually hold that against them if that's the only car they can afford? Like that's what you're talking about, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's a tough one. I don't know, Samantha.
So I think what I do when I research a big purchase, or not even just a big purchase, but like most of my purchases, I try to know the brand that I'm buying. And one of the things that I looked at and I spent a significant amount of time doing is if I'm buying from a brand that is saying that they're an ethical corporation, I'm usually a lot harder on them than I am on like going to Walmart if that's the only place that I can afford to get a pool noodle or something. Because in my head, that if you say that you're a corporation that donates X amount of dollars or...
All right, like, so here we go. Let's talk about Tom's shoes then. Do you guys like Tom's shoes? You do?
Okay. I No, I don't. I'm saying like I absolutely don't like their model. I appreciate that the CEO, when called down on it within the last 6 months or so, said that, oh yeah, that is a really shitty model. Like I have to change how I do things. What I do is his marketplace, the Tom's marketplace, is actually really interesting because of you can see the corporations that are selling into it. So I went through a rabbit hole and I went through like a bunch of their corporations and I was like, I want to see like, what are you a B Corp? Like, what do you do here? How much actually goes back to XYZ thing that you do? So I'll research days and days and days on ethical companies to make sure that they're actually ethical. Because if I know a brand is already unethical, I've already made that decision that I'm going to buy it. If a brand has said that it is ethical, I'm going to be sure that they are ethical, or at least that their decisions are supporting what they're saying, and that if they have any fiscal statements or if they have a stakeholders meeting or something like that that I can see minutes of to make sure that that's actually the information that's being presented, I will go the extra mile before I buy it because I don't want to be tricked into buying something from an ethical company that isn't ethical.
Do you guys all know what B Corps are?
Mm-hmm.
Kieran? Addie? No? Okay. I wondered that because, you know, Samantha, you come from a very
I'm not familiar
specific...
with the terminology.
Well, because Samantha works in basically government, right? Or you have a knowledge base that not... Because what I really want to get out of this is what you think most of your friends and people that are your social peers. You know, I know what a B Corps is because I write the social justice series. But like, do you guys all know about Tom's PR issues about the model that they were built on and how it was basically it was hurting more than it was helping in many of the economies they were giving shoes away in. But see, that's what I wonder is, okay, so Samantha goes crazy and researches like mad and is like a stereotypical millennial, but I don't know that that's true. I mean, Judy, do you do that? Do you have time to put that much research? Because into what you buy.
I don't think I'm quite as intense as Samantha, but I would say that I would like to be. I do actually put a lot of research into what I do, and what happens a lot of the time is I'll find myself buying something because I am used to it. I repeatedly go back to this product, and then finally one day I realize that I don't know anything about the company, and I make the effort at that point to go and kind of find out what's going on. I ended up buying like the 15th pair of New Balance running shoes a few years ago because I really liked the way that they felt, I liked the way they fit, and then finally I was like, oh, well, they're actually made here. This is something, a good reason besides I don't have sweaty feet to keep going to them. So sometimes, you have pleasant surprises like that, and other times, you hear conversations certain places, or you get little tidbits, through, your Facebook feed or wherever about, oh, and this, company, this, this larger company owns all these little tiny brands, and I didn't realize that something I enjoyed was part of that, and I need to go and look into it more. So I do think it is something that it's it's fairly common, at least among my friends, to research these things and talk to each other about them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's I think on the transparency factor, like, I mean, it's sort of, and we'll probably talk a little about this later too, but it's sort of funny to me that there's so much vitriol about like the me generation, and the selfie generation. I mean, honestly, it's not about me at all. I don't care less, and most of my friends feel the same way. We're interested in us. It's about people connected together, working with each other, caring about each other. That's what it's actually about. So the selfie generation stuff, I think, is sort of silly. And the reason I say that is that when you think about like transparency, I think millennials are a little smarter than we get credit for in terms of being able to sort of like smell when it's wrong, right? And I don't necessarily do hours and hours of research on brands, but I know which ones are legitimate, which ones aren't, because over time that they reveal themselves whether they mean to or not, right? And so with Tom's example, and I think with examples like Nestle or Coca-Cola, where there are kind of like troubling aspects to the entire ecosystem that they have, over time, if they're not really doing things in a transparent manner, that becomes an ethical question too, not just what they're doing, but the way in which they're presenting themselves.
So who goes to Starbucks? Nobody? Hesse, you don't. Well, you go to Tim Hortons.
I don't. I go to McDonald's. They have the better coffee. And let's not talk about McDonald's because I know they do a lot of bad things. I just like their coffee.
I don't know. I mean, the reason I brought up Starbucks is because I love Howard. You know, he's one of my business heroes, like one of my top 3. And I love so much about the way they treat their employees and the fact that they are willing to say publicly and as transparently as possible, yeah, we charge more for coffee, and our employees that work here at least 30 hours a week get benefits. However, what I just learned, my good friend locally worked for Starbucks for years and has her own coffee shop here on the island. And she and another coffee shop owner were kvetching about Starbucks because they don't buy fair trade coffee, which I did not realize. And I was like, what? That can't be true. Not Howard. And then I mean, I don't drink coffee. I drink tea. And I do know about all the issues in the tea industry. And I wrote about a company called Teatulia that does. They basically created their own tea farm because there's so many issues with wholesale farmers. You know, because you basically show up and auction it off, and there are a lot of issues in the tea industry. But I did not realize that Starbucks didn't buy fair trade coffee. And when I went to try to research that online, I had a really hard time finding any criticism of them over it and finding the information out even on their own website. So I know Kiernan is a barista at Saxby's, right? So he makes even better coffee, I guess. And Hesse's in Canada where there aren't Starbucks in every corner. But is that a reason you guys don't go to Starbucks, or is it more of the anti-cult thing?
There's also, they sell this thing called Globe Water, which is literally a bottle of water with a picture of the globe on it, and it's supposed to donate to X amount of charities, and it doesn't, so...
Well, how do you know it doesn't? Where did you find that out?
I took a picture of the label, and then I went through the charitable acts system and the Better Business Bureau to make sure that I had all the information, and I was like, this is awful. But I mean, most of my friends, we all did like peace and conflict studies or global studies degrees and like came out very critical of stuff, so that's something that we do all the time. So.
Joe, why don't you go?
I mean, I actually don't have a problem with Starbucks. I don't really go there because I like local coffee. It's actually better. I mean, there's some places that I go to where the coffee's unbelievable. It's 10 times better than any chain could ever be. And so, you know, I'm not snooty in that sense. I kind of like good coffee, and that's kind of.
Sounded pretty snooty.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll own that then. So I don't have a bad perception of Starbucks, and I go there occasionally if I'm traveling and I can't get a hold of something local that seems legitimate. But you know, I don't think that they're pretending to be something they're not, and that's one of the reasons that I have a favorable impression of them. Is that I think Starbucks is pretty clear about their model and what they're up to, and I respect that, whether I necessarily participate in all the time or not.
I think that one of the bigger things is it depends on how strongly an individual is aligned to that specific issue, right? If fair trade is not a big issue with some people, or they don't know enough about it, then it would not stop them from going to places like Starbucks, right? But it's also an issue for chocolate bar manufacturers as well, right? And I think from the standpoint of being ethical, obviously right now it's not hurting the Starbucks brand, and maybe it's not. I mean, as big as fair trade is, for some reason it's not the thing that defines Starbucks from a negative standpoint.
So what are your favorite brands?
Yes.
From an ethical standpoint.
I don't know, Judy?
She's trying to unmute herself.
Sorry, I was freezing a little there. You know what? I find that a lot of the times the brands that I'm ethically drawn to, they tend to be smaller, and I don't know if that's like a preconceived prejudice on my part, or if I'm just naturally shying away from chains because I expect that it's going to be harder to get, to get things that are fair trade, harder to get things that are, environmentally conscious, et cetera, et cetera. But, here a couple of brands that I'm really excited about. There is a Wisconsin-based dog food company called Stella and Chewy's that's been spreading around the country, and they take really good care of their workers. They pay a really decent wage, and then the product itself is, they're very worried about green standards, and they do a whole lot of nutrition research, which isn't very common in pet food. And the fact that they put themselves out there to, give you so much information, things that I had never thought before, never bothered to pay attention to the difference between chicken meal versus chicken, things like that. They have a lot of information out there that you can digest and then use that same education that they've given you to go and compare to other products. And that sort of level of transparency and responsibility is something that I find very attractive.
Okay, Kiernan, are there any brands you like?
Well, I mean, most of the time when I think of, brand ethics, I really do consider it to be, very superficial. For instance, I know one of your clients, the League Outfitters. I think it's, it's their business model.
You're frozen.
It doesn't change.
Wait, go back here. You
Frozen?
said League. Wait, we lost you. We lost you for a minute. You froze. You said League. It's League Collegiate Outfitters. And what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that, it's great. Their business model and the way the CEO treats, the employees, how they have the daycare, how it's, I guess, sort of like a fair trade sort of product, if you will, even though there's no real, I don't know. Maybe I didn't do enough research to an accreditation for clothing manufacturers.
But wait, are you saying you like them, or you think that it's superficial?
His clothing manufacturer.
This is killing me because I can't.
I'm not saying really either. What I'm trying to say is there's an overarching, societal issue where we are outsourcing our clothing, manufacturing, industry.
Yeah.
It is too expensive to pay American wages to produce these types of products domestically, and that's a problem. That we country laborers.
But okay, so here's the thing, though.
That's really what it
I
is.
have a big.
And
But I have a question for you because you're the globalization. He's frozen. So you're the globalization, advocate, right? So, and there are manufacturers who manufacture here. American Apparel does, and there's a company that I love. It's a little company called Fed by Threads, and not only is it American made, but it's all organic, and I mean it's as pure as you can get, but it's expensive. The thing with League, and this is a good example, and I'm not just plugging them because they're a client. They're a client because I absolutely fell in love with the business model and courted them because they were hiding all of their good stories under a bushel basket. But basically what they did is they were buying apparel for many years, trying to make it. Then they made it, and eventually they built their own factory in El Salvador, partly out of the frustration with the volatility of the apparel industry. So they own it, and it's their own company in El Salvador, and they pay very good wages. And they they realized that one of the big problems they had is that their employees didn't have daycare, and some of the women were leaving their children home alone or with people they didn't trust, adding layers of stress. So they started a daycare in-house. Then they started a pediatrics. Then they started an adult education center where they, for free, and they work with the local Jesuit university, give GEDs and college educations to not only their own employees, but anyone else in the whole park, the American Industrial Park. And this story just goes on and on. I mean, they're always finding new layers and ways to help their employees, and their employees give it back in full because it's really like a family. However, wait, sorry. My point is, does it matter that that's in El Salvador? Because why isn't it a good thing that they're treating people well in El Salvador? If we've accepted globalization, why is American made as important? That's a question.
Joe, did you want to answer that, or did you have?
I want to.
Well,
Karen, it's frozen.
It's interesting. Well, I'm sorry. Can I go?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you keep freezing. That's the
Okay.
only thing.
I wasn't trying to, take a jab. Oh, yeah, I wasn't trying to take a jab at League. I think their business model's great. And as far as globalization is concerned, I mean, that's the most ethical way that you can possibly accept this sort of globalization. But what I'm kind of interested in is, when did it become okay to, when did we decide that we were accepting this economic model of globalization? When, and this is definitely, a transition, over time, how we come to accept this. But millennials, we were born into this globalized world, that is this so-called neoliberal piece of governments really is supporting business, free markets, and this corporate model rather than this humanitarian model, of taking care of citizens. And we've never known any other world. And it's interesting to me because there's always this sort of flag, this sort of backlash. Oh, can you guys hear me? My computer's doing
Yeah,
weird
we can
stuff.
hear you. We can hear you. We can't see you, but keep going.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in this
Keep
coffee
going.
shop.
No,
Probably
keep going. We
bothering
can hear
everyone
you.
here. Well, and I'm losing my train of thought here. But what I find interesting is that I think that our generation is kind of similar to the baby boomers, okay, when they were younger, the protests in the '60s and the Occupy Wall Street movement. There's a parallel there. There's this sort of unresolved conflict. And during the late '60s.
Oh,
We lost him. Um, I mean, okay. I guess that's a big question. Like, is globalization, is it a bad thing? Do you think about it or even aware of it? Because, in the '70s, when I was young, the Made in America movement tried really hard to hang on to manufacturing jobs, but at some point in the '80s, we all gave up and said it's just not the model, and that's when information and technology became more of the frontier. Does that matter? Wait, Joe's gonna go. Karen, I'm gonna have Joe go. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Sorry.
Sorry,
These are weighty issues, right? And I wouldn't even claim to have the economic background to solve any of them. I do think that like a lot of it goes back to what we talked about, which is this sort of transparency issue, which is is it what it looks like or something else, right? And and I'll circle back to your question, Amy, which is what's the deal with American made? Well, some brands that I really respect and like are very much American brands, like Thorlos, which is they make socks. That's all they do.
What are they called?
Thorlos, Thorlos, family-run business. I think 60 some years in North Carolina. I mean, they're just good people and they do good work and they pay people fairly and their product is unbelievable. It's like the best socks I've ever had, which is a crazy thing to say, but they're that good, right? And I've been a runner for many years, so that's kind of important to me. But there are examples of American made, but I think that when you look at the globalization model, like human made is the question, right? There's a cost and there's a toll to anything, and I think, for me at least, and for the people that I know who are my age or a little bit younger, what I hear is that we're sort of asking questions about how, what's the growth of the development of the learning curve of the brands that we have to interact with. I don't expect, the Coca-Colas of the world to suddenly show up and like throw a ribbon on it, put a bow on it, and everything's going to be great. That's a hard world. That's a very difficult supply chain. There's a lot of very complex economics. That doesn't mean they can't get better, though. That doesn't mean they can't say, here's where we're at. like it's not acceptable, or here's what we're doing that we do like and what we could do more of. It's that growth and that development aspects, and I think that's a really key foundation of brand ethics for people that I know is, are you getting better?
So do you give big brands, okay, so the Hershey company is going through something because the chocolate industry has really been come under fire for unethical labor practices. And I am friends with a lot of people at Hershey because it funds Milton Hershey School. Milton Hershey School owns it, and have spoken to the chairman of Hershey Foods many times about this issue. And, they'll tell you that they have a social responsibility segment of the business that has been working very hard, and they have made change after change after change. Is that enough? And are big brands given a pass because it takes longer to move their model? Or do millennials not, like, sometimes I listen to Kieran and I think he's totally right, like, do people care? Like, is this something you're aware of on a day-to-day basis? Or is this something we talk about when we're being nerdy and, intellectual? Or is it something like before you go out and, okay, I'm going shopping, I'm going to go to the grocery store, and I'm going to go to Whole Foods because it's cool, even though they truck their produce from 1,200 miles or farther on average. It's not a locavore thing. Does that stuff matter on a weekly basis, or is it something that, we write about and talk about, and then we just go on our merry way because we can't afford or we don't have time to think harder? And when I say we, I mean you guys.
I don't buy certain things based on what I know about corporations. Like, I don't buy Lindor chocolate because they donate money to Autism Speaks, and Autism Speaks tells parents of autistic children that vaccines did it to them, and that's ridiculous. And then when I look at how when I eat, if I can afford farmers market, I'm going to go to a farmers market. But I try to at least see where things are being given to me if I'm going to a superstore or whatever for my food. So I try to make choices as much as I can on a regular basis. And so I think at least for me and for my friends, we're constantly thinking about it. So if it means that a couple of my friends refuse to buy certain soy products because of how some of the soy manufacturing is done and temporary foreign workers and things like that. So I think we're a little bit more cognizant of it than but we don't talk about it openly. It's it's just oh, that company does this, or oh, that's too far away, can I grow this or whatever. And there's quite a few movements, at least for community gardens that a lot of people are trying to get into, co-ops or organic food boxes. So I think if you can afford it, you're really thinking about it. If you can't afford it, it's still cogging in the back of your head, but you have to make those decisions as you go.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think regardless of whether people take actions on it, it's something that's present, right? And I know people, look, a lot of my friends don't have that much cash, right? Some of them work in the serving industry. They're just not making a lot of money. I have some friends that do the nonprofit thing, arts, other careers where there's just not a lot of cash. And I've been on both ends of that, right? I've made a lot of money and I've made almost no money, right? So I kind of have a sense of how those things work. And, but at the end of the day, I don't think that people are unaware, right? And nobody, I think very few people sit down and think what brands am I interacting with this month, and how am I interacting with them, and what are their ethics? But given what we know, as you sort of go up the chain of importance in terms of items, the vegetables you put in your body, right? If they're just covered in pesticides and chemicals, and there are problems with the way that the labor works to create the supply chain to get the vegetables to where you're at. I don't, I know there's a set of affluent millennials that kind of live probably in a different world, particularly because maybe they're seeing some of the, maybe they're seeing some of the proceeds of those profits. But most people I know, whether they sit down and research where their turnips came from or not, are pretty darn aware of how that system works.
No, that's interesting. I'm wondering if, and it's funny the way you guys are conscious of this, and yet I still struggle with the fact that that's a foregoing thought process from a weekly perspective. Like Samantha and Joe, yes, there's awareness about this stuff, but really, do you consider yourselves the average millennial that will be really conscious and aware of your purchases based on this stuff?
So wait, But that's the point. So Samantha says yes, her friends do. Kiernan, you're saying you don't think most of them care? Most of your affluent college buddies?
Well, I would say that there's a certain sort of awareness where if if you're constantly thinking about this, it just becomes overwhelming, and you just have to accept a certain level of complacency. And I think that um, a lot of my affluent friends are they're just as complacent as anyone else. But I personally feel like these are the people who, you know, have this purchasing power, and I feel that they have a sort of responsibility to do the more, ethical things. Like the remember that scandal a while back about the Walmart that had the food drive for the actual employees. I mean,
Do you know
it's
the
it's
reality? Do you know the real story there was that wasn't Walmart sponsored, that was employees doing it for each other?
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. But I think that there's just this disconnect between caring about people really. I mean, my brother-in-law, he's in the military, and most people in the military are on food stamps. The government, the military, the enlisted men, they are not paid enough money to have a family. They're not paid enough. They're not there's not enough money, and every year, they go and they try to close down the commissaries. They try to close down the BX. They try to take away benefits, from veterans. And veterans and active military, these people are like untouchable. If you start saying bad things about veterans and people in the military, I mean, it's just they're off limits. But ever so subtly, people look the other way and they say, oh, we need to cut defense spending, we need to cut this and that, and it gets to a certain point where you know the product that you're left with, it's horrible. Why should people out there, supposedly sacrificing their lives on a daily basis to protect our freedoms, and we can't even take care of them? What's the deal with that? But
How do we get there?
I'm sorry. It's just I don't know.
You know what?
The conversation
Anyway,
drifts.
I want to ask. I know I'm just teasing you. I want to ask Judy though. Jude, are your friends like thinking like this? Are they into that dog food, or are they on a regular basis trying to buy secondhand or refurbished or from a brand that is ethical, or is it not something that you talk about much?
It actually, it surprised me kind of how the line divides go on this. I have friends that came through acting programs, theater programs, things like that, and obviously, I work with large groups of people there that are very concerned with those things. And there are some of the ones who are a bit more affluent, as we were discussing before. They went to fancier schools and whatever, but I definitely think that Kieran's right. There is this level where they never really had to think about what their money was doing, so they didn't. I've had actually some surprising conversations recently with people that I had thought I'd known a bit more about their opinions. Find out that they're not concerned. They're doing other things, and that's just, they don't have mind space for that. But the flip side of it is back home. Amy and I are from a very rural area, very conservative, Republican, low economics. It's Obama's not popular there.
Is what we call it.
And I have friends back home that they're college graduates. This isn't an educational thing, but they have no interest in caring. Like they don't want to be bothered is what I've actually heard from a couple of them. And then on the flip side of it, I also I've got a couple of cousins that are a great example there, and they actually get angry about having these conversations. And I don't mean me approaching them saying, "Oh, you shouldn't buy this." You know, they'll see where there are articles online, and rather than, you know, having a discussion about it, they immediately shut down and are against it without knowing, you know, necessarily everything that's going with it. And I think it's almost an overload reaction. There's too much pressure, too much to worry about, and that's how some of them are dealing
Like
with.
what kind of things do they react to? You mean like an environmental story, like go compost or recycle? Really?
Environment is actually a recent example. A cousin of mine she works for the gas lines, and she had you know, she had come across an article about fracking, and she was, you know, very, very upset about it. Obviously, working in that industry, she's got opinions on it. But listening to her, I thought she was talking about having environmental protesters, and what she was actually yelling about was the regulators that like are paid to make sure the company is staying on board with their current standards. You know, whatever your opinions on those standards may be. And even that, she just did not want to deal with it because she thought that they were in the way and they should just let her do her job, and she didn't want to be bothered with it.
And how old is she?
25.
Yeah, see?
Well, and we add to that, like, one of the other interesting pieces is that we live in an op-ed culture now, right? I mean, how many people, and I'm being totally real with you here, like how many people, whether they're from large brands and they're making, you know, high six figures or a lot more, or they're sitting on the street corner doing nothing, like how many of those people are really looking at the way that things actually work? You know, it's the op-ed culture thing, I think, is really, really strong, and it tends to make it very hard to do anything but live in that abstract, which, to Judy's point, is I think why a lot of us feel, people I know feel overwhelmed. I do at times. I purposefully limit my consumption of information very directly because of that.
Do you think, do you guys think that in the future that this is actually going to change the way companies do business? I mean,
I think it already is. Yeah, I think like Unilever, for example, is in the midst of a very serious and major shift. I won't get long-winded about it, but the reason I think it has to is because you can't. That division between like, here's what we present as who we are and here's what we're actually doing, it's becoming very hard to keep that apart. And I think, you know, when you think about brand ethics, that's a big thing that's going on. Is that kind of that, you know, you can't be sustainable over time by saying you're one thing and then it turns out you're another.
And I mean, Hesse, you know, from the conversations we've had with Hershey Foods, like they care because they care, and I do think it's a decent company. I mean, I think it's a really decent company. They also care because they see what happens, and they want to make sure that they're on the right side, you know, so that, you know, it's like Joe said earlier, a corporation can't shift overnight, but I think, I think it's changing. I just keep going back to Ryan Winia, who can never make this. He's going to be in one of these hangouts. He's a really bright guy who does customer experience for Walgreens. Sent Hesse and I a whole bunch of homework over the weekend, and the one study that really fascinated me, and I think it was a Pew Research study, you know, showing how similar the generations are in the way they purchase, kind of took me back a little bit, you know, like I know there's so much written about millennials, and I'm a huge cheerleader, but part of me goes, is it changing that much? I mean, I guess it is because of the transparency that the internet has given us, that brands are held accountable. But when I started writing my social justice series in the beginning, which was about the mob mentality and the backlash, what I found over and over again was this was the formula. CEO or company makes stupid mistake, right? Sometimes it was employee mistake. Sometimes it was the CEO saying something obnoxious like American Apparel, and he eventually did get fired, but that was only very recently for personal things. So then the mob freaks out. There's all sorts of hullabaloo on social media. Everyone's yelling and screaming and yelling and screaming. And then go forward 6 months or a year, and I actually did a post once where I went back over, you know, the top 10 blow-ups of social media in that year. How did it affect sales? And almost categorically, every one of them had better sales, not worse, than before the faux pas. And so I just wonder if we really know what we're talking about when we think that things are going to change that much. I hope they do. That's why we're having this conversation, right? Sorry, Hesse, I knew I would talk.
No, that's good, because in a lot of ways, they talk about no news is bad news necessarily, right? And so
no news is good news.
Well, not lately.
That's the saying, though. Hesse is not, English is her first language, but she grew up in a household where English wasn't the first language. It's no news is good news.
No, but the reason I say no news is bad news is that there are companies out there like the Gap. Like eventually, no matter how bad of a PR spin that was with changing the logo, there are positive sales that come out of that. So it's almost like whether or not you get good press or bad press, there's going to be an inherent benefit to the company.
Okay, I'll tell you the one organization where it really hurt is Susan G. Komen has never recovered. They have not recovered. They have lost huge amounts of donors, and I don't think they'll ever get it back. And Planned Parenthood has gained because of it. So I guess it depends. And see, Samantha was laughing because she knew exactly what I was talking about. Hesse does all these sayings, but she always mixes them up a little, and I'm like, English is first language, though.
I'm learning. Come on.
She determined it's because her parents were not native English speakers, and they mixed it up.
Okay. So
Anyway.
Anyway. Well, that's a different topic. we got to wrap up. It's like 9 o'clock. Okay.
It is.
So
We'll be back next week, right?
We'll be back next week. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I don't know if there's any closing thoughts on this, but this is a great topic, and it seems to me, at least from my perspective, that as important as this topic is to me, it seems like even from a generational perspective, is much more important for your generation, and because you're much more aware, and I think in a great way, you're going to affect the way other people in the next generation think as well, and I think that's a great thing. So, all right.
All right, say goodbye, everybody.
We're going to say goodbye. We'll see everybody next week. Have a good weekend, everybody.
See y'all. Have a good one.